it's so great that you're still coming. You know, it's fantastic, you know, to go through life and that, you know, you still have people that will come and hear your work. And so anyway, I greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to focus on 2 books. Both of them are, you know, reprints, but had very small audiences when they first came out. And but in the course of the evening, if there's something else you want me to read in another book, and if you got it, I can switch over. And the focus this evening is on Woolgathering. And Woolgathering, the little book that you have, I talk about in the introduction the little history of this book. But I'm very, very proud of this book for a whole other reason. When I was a teenager, I discovered Arthur Rimbaud, and I discovered him through Illuminations, which was, and A Season in Hell, which were New Directions books. And I love these books so much. And then after that, many other New Directions books. And it was really my great dream when I was a young aspiring poet to someday be on New Directions. And I just always thought it was just the coolest publisher. And now this is my first book on New Directions, and I'm really so thrilled and happy. And I just, it's wonderful, even though it took, well, 40 years. I still got on there, right? So it means quite a bit to me. So I'll read something from... Well, I'll read the introduction, even though it's already in the book. Well, everything I'm reading is in the book, so... I was wondering, well, if I read and you haven't read the book, will that spoil it? But it's not like a detective story or anything, so... To the reader. In 1991, I lived on the outskirts of Detroit with my husband and 2 children in an old stone house set by a canal that emptied into Lake St. Clair. Ivy and morning glory climbed the deteriorating walls. A profusion of grapevines and wild roses draped the balcony where doves nested in their tangles. The yard was a bit overgrown, much to our neighbors' consternation, and they would often try to tame it while we were away. This is true. One time, you know, Fred and I, before our kids were born, we took a trip south, and we had like these wild rose vines that were all over the place, and I grew dandelions, made salads with them, so I didn't get rid of them. And I didn't have much of a green thumb, but I was so proud because I finally grew morning glories, and they were blue and they were really beautiful, and I planted them myself because I'm the kind of person that could kill a cactus. I'm just like not very good. And I came back and it would look like somebody had like given my whole yard a haircut, you know. And it was our next door neighbor, this broad, she was, you know, really anal broad that lived next door. And she says to me, well, you're gonna thank me because guess what? And I said, what? I was already pissed off because she pruned my roses. She said, I got rid of those damn morning glories. They just like cover everything. They're just wild. And I thought that I would really actually have a heart attack. I was so upset. And so I did my best as everything grew back in to make certain that lots of dandelion seedlings went into her little pristine yard. Anyway, sorry to digress, but I'm still somewhat bitter. Our unruly patch boasted an abundance of wildflowers, lilacs, 2 ancient willows, and a single pear tree. I truly love my family and our home, yet that spring I experienced a terrible and inexpressible melancholy. I would sit for hours when my chores were done and the children at school beneath the willows, lost in thought. That was the atmosphere of my life as I began to compose Woolgathering. I had received a letter from Raymond Foy, who co-founded Hanuman Books with Francesca Clemente, requesting a manuscript. A Hanuman book was only 3 by 4 inches in size, like a tiny Indian prayer book that one could carry around in their pocket. Charmed by the prospect, I began my task in early fall, just as the pears were forming. I wrote slowly at first, and Raymond would call every so often to encourage me. In other words, write the fucking book. No, just joking. He wouldn't say that. One afternoon, he called to relay a request from William Burroughs. All Hanuman books were numbered on the spine, and mine was to be 46, the year of my birth. But William desired it, as his favorite number was 23, which doubled to mine. For the love of William, I traded with him. See, we're all insane. It is. I wrote by hand on sheets of graph paper, and on December 30th, 1991, on my 45th birthday, I completed the manuscript. I sent it off to Raymond, who typed it out for me and sent it to Madras to be published. As it turned out, 45 was the perfect number for me. I gave my father the first copy of Woolgathering, but as time passed, he said nothing. My father was a beautiful man, but difficult to impress, and I only half-heartedly hoped he would read it. Yet some years later, shortly before his death, he said to me, "Patricia," that's how he talked, "Patricia, I have read your book." I prepared myself for certain criticism, but was struck that he called such a small offering a book. "You're a good writer," he said, and he made me a cup of coffee. It was the only such compliment he ever gave me. Someone asked if I would consider Woolgathering a fairy tale. I have always adored such tales, but I'm afraid it does not qualify. Everything contained in this little book is true, and written just like it was. The writing of it drew me from my strange torpor, and I hope that in some measure it will fill the reader with a vague and curious joy. So what I'm going to do is the book has sort of it's got two parallel things. It's got looking back on South Jersey and this period of my life when I was like from about 8 to 11. And it also has memories of living on McDougal Street in the mid-70s. And why they're both in there, I couldn't tell you. Except when I was writing this, I was focused on my childhood. But the other thing, I left New York City in 1979 and moved to Michigan to be with my future husband. And the one thing I most missed in the world was going to cafes. I miss just in New York City how you can just walk out and there's always a place you can buy coffee. The only place that I had to buy coffee in St. Clair Shores was the 7-Eleven, which was half a mile away. So I would have to walk to the 7-Eleven, then find some whitewashed building, the side of a whitewashed building, and pretend I was in Algiers because it was that was it, So there's a little bit of cafe nostalgia also running parallel. And Doesn't make any sense. But I guess it's part nostalgia for South Jersey and a little for New York City. So anyway, this is called a bidding. And this, of course, is across from this fantastic haircut. My mother, every time we had picture day at school, my mother, because I had like long braids, you know, just long little greasy braids, my mother would think that was the perfect time to give me a new do for the school picture. So, you know, she would get like buy little things of children's Tony. I don't know if they still have that. It's like a little permanent. And of course, my hair would hold a permanent for about 48 hours. And she'd give me some stupid Tony, and then she'd like cut all my bangs to here. Every year, I can't tell you, every school picture, each one is more pathetic than the next. But anyway, this is one of my favorites because I was obviously trying to be so stoic and be a good girl, even though inside I was filled with hatred. How this picture survived was when my dad died, we found it in his wallet. So thought that was really nice. A bidden. I always imagined I would write a book, if only a small one, that would carry one away into a realm that could not be measured nor even remembered. I imagined a lot of things, that I would shine, that I'd be good. I'd dwell bareheaded on a summit, turning a wheel that would turn the earth, and undetected amongst the clouds, I would have some influence, be of some avail. Curious wishes feathered the air, making light the limbs of a somber, spindle-legged child, barely able to keep her anklets from disappearing into her heavy shoes. Do you have that problem? I don't know what it is about. I still have this problem where my socks always like, they just like, do you have that problem too? It was just like, and I had such big shoes because my feet, I grew really fast and I'm the tallest person in my family. And I like the biggest feet in my family. And my feet would grow so fast that my mother, in September, when we all got our new school shoes, she'd have to get me a size larger because by the end of the year, my feet would, you know, I'd grow, and they didn't have a lot of money. So, you know, I got, you know, one pair of shoes that I had to grow into, and my socks always went inside of them. It just, anyway, sorry to talk about it. You know, I could go to a psychiatrist, but this is so much cheaper. All my socks were out of shape, possibly because I often filled them with marbles. I'd load them with Aggies and Steelies and head out. It was the one thing I was good at, and I could beat anyone around. At night, I'd pour my booty upon my bed and wipe them with a chamois. I'd arrange them by color, by order of merit, and they'd rearrange themselves, small glowing planets, each with its own history, each with its own will of gold. I never had a sense that the ability to win came from me. I always felt it was in the object itself, some piece of magic that was animated through my touch. In this manner, I found magic in everything, as if all things, all of nature, bore the imprint of a jinn. You had to be careful. You had to be wise, for the discerning might catch something far away and draw it close. And the wind caught the edges of the cloth that covered my window. There I kept vigil, alert to the small, easily becoming, through an open eye, monstrous and beautiful. I would gaze, gauge, and just like that, be gone, vain avion, flitting from earth to earth, unconscious of my awkward arms or my wayward socks. I was off, and not a soul was aware, for it appeared to all that I was still among them, upon my little bed, wrapped in child's play. think I'll just read the next one. And I'll skip around or go far afield in a moment, but I can tell you a little thing about the wool gatherers. Where I lived in South Jersey, we moved to South Jersey, let me think when it was, like 1958 or something like that. And I was born in Chicago, and then we went to Germantown, Pennsylvania, which wasn't far from Philly. And then we went to South Jersey. And what it was it was like a little community of really little ranch houses built on a filled-in swamp across from a giant field that had a square dance hall. And we didn't have like a basement. So a lot of the houses had a basement, but it was really good we didn't, because the houses, because they were built in a swamp, they all started sinking. And everybody's house that had a basement was like filled with like smelly water. And it was a really interesting place. At first it was kind of scary to me because, you know, I was, you know, a city girl, you know, Germantown and Philadelphia. You know, I thought I was really cool, and then I had to, you know, live in South Jersey. But it had its great charm, you know, especially when I look back. I remember one time I was in the yard and my father told me to water the grass. And so I picked up the hose to water it, and it moved in my hand, and I was almost paralyzed. It was like a 8-foot black snake, but not a dangerous kind, just like a, you know, some local water snake or something. I almost died. I still, when I think about it, it was just like a black hose, big black hose. You didn't see that kind of thing in Philadelphia. So anyway, the wool gatherers. There was a field. There was a hedge composed of great bushes framing my view. The hedge I regarded as sacred, the stronghold of the spirit. The field I revered as well, with its high beckoning grass and powerful bend. Beyond to the right was an orchard, and to the left a whitewashed barn with the words Hoedown Hall above the double doors. Here on Sunday evenings we would all meet and dance to the fiddler and the fiddler's call. Later, after my bath, my mother would comb my hair, and I'd say my prayers, and she'd tuck me in. I'd wait till all was quiet. Then I'd rise, mount a chair, push aside the cloth that covered my window, and continue my prayers, wandering to greet my God. On clear, peculiar nights, I sometimes saw movement in the grasses. At first I thought it to be the swipe of a white owl, or the great pale wings of a luna moth spreading and folding like a medieval habit. But it came to me one night that they were people like none I had ever seen, in strange archaic cap and dress. I used to think I could see the white of their bonnets, and at times a hand in the act of grasping, illuminated by the moon and stars or the light from a passing car. Morning found the field bright, abundant, with 1,000 wildflowers. We often gathered them and wove them into crowns, but the centerpiece was the old black barn, inhabited by bats. It has long since burned, but at that time it stood like a battered top hat that only the courageous or forlorn might wear. We'd pass it on our walks, my brother, sister, and I. I was the eldest, the youngest not yet born. We'd walk to the center of town and scale the stone wall that protected like a mother's arms the cemetery of Friends. It was a Quaker area. Beneath the great walnut trees, the brethren came to rest, and it seemed to us, even by day, to be the most discreet and silent place on earth. Here, enveloped by an air both solemn and sweet, we puffed on the punks we cut from the swamp, communing for hours, yet not saying a word. These times filled us with joy, volumes of joy that still pleasure me in the reading. Skipping home, we'd salute all that charmed us, the old man who sold minnows, the creek that seemed so wide it might have opened into the mouth of the Delaware, the armory, the hall, and then Thomas's field, greeting us, seeming to call us by name. We raced through the grass, meeting up with our friends. Sometimes I just plop deep within it and stare up at the sky. It seemed like all of creation was mapped out above, and I was drawn from the laughter of the other children into a stillness I aspired to master. Here, one could hear a seed form or the soul fold like a handkerchief. I believed they were there, the people. I could hear them now and then, murmuring and whistling as if behind a wall of cotton. I could hear them, but I could never make out the language they were speaking, nor the melodies they were weaving. When I'd return, everything was as it was. I'd run and join the others, and we'd play Statue and Red Rover, or if we were feeling brave, we'd venture into the barn and pitch sticks at the bats. Later, crossing the road home, I never failed to bow my head as we passed the bush. One afternoon, I was sent to town alone. I was in an agitated state, for I had decided to ask the old man who sold the minnows about the people in the field. Children feared him, but in a certain light. He seemed almost blessed, eternal, the oldest man in the oldest house, a tumbling shack, painted black and set back in an overgrown patch. The word bait was stenciled on the Tilton roof. Here he sat in all weather in his overalls, long white hair and beard, keeping watch over the world and the grave of his wife buried in the shadows by the house. I stood there by him. It seemed to me I never really asked, for my mind, darting this way and that, would not cooperate with my tongue. But perhaps a phrase or two escaped, for he answered as he turned the bowl of his pipe without opening his eyes, without as much as moving his lips. "They be the wool gatherers." I didn't question beyond that. It seemed too fragile, too important. I just lit out, fairly flew, scarcely remembering to say goodbye. But I did turn to wave as I ran, and his open eyes caught mine and seemed to contain that which one might only call a splendor. I was not all sure what a wool gatherer was, but it seemed like a worthy calling, and it seemed like a good job for me. And so I kept watch in every weather. Then I drew the cloth and I lay upon my bed, unable to sleep, amusing myself by giving them names and designing by the beam of my pocket flash their cloaks and boots and the clouds they called home. And the image of the wool gatherers in that sleepy field drew me to sleep as well, and I wandered among them through thistle and thorn, with no task more exceptional than to rescue a fleeting thought as a tuft of wool from the comb of the wind. Thank you. On page 53, class. Hello, is everybody okay back there? You all right? Okay. This piece is not, there are some pieces in this book that are not in the original Hanuman. I wrote this piece especially for this little volume, and it's a story I always wanted to tell, but it was too difficult. So finally I got it out. And it's relatable, even though I wrote it recently, of course, to the piece I just wrote, because it starts speaking about the old man. 1957. His name was Harry Riddle, a good name for a detective, but he seemed more shaman than detective. He would sit in all weathers in the dry patch in front of his slightly tilted house with black shingles that made it look two-dimensional. He sat next to painted orange crates and sold bait, mostly minnows and worms. I never saw him anywhere else, and I only saw him get up once and enter his black shape of a shack and seemingly disappear. His wife had died in 1947, and he buried her in their yard. This seemed to me an ultimate expression of being free, to be able to choose where to bury someone you love. I imagined he was sitting there, not only to sell bait, but as her guardian. He watched over her, and because she was near to him, he was also near to her. I always looked forward to catching a glimpse of him, holy as he was. I wasn't supposed to go into town alone, but my mother would occasionally take me to Woodbury to get the Broad Street bus to Camden. We would pass him, and he would give me a nod. Sometimes it might be no more than a wrinkle of an eye, but I knew it was for me. In the summer of 1957, my youngest sibling, Kimberly, was born. She came 10 years after me and was a surprise to everyone, including my mother. I remember my parents leaving for the hospital. There was a commercial for paper towels on TV from the Kimberly Clark Company, and that is what my mother named her. Got to get a name somewhere. My mother said when she saw her face, she knew she had seen that face before, but she couldn't place it. Then she realized it was her own face, because Kimberly looked just like my mom. Kimberly was a sunny child, though she had severe asthma and a host of allergies. In our little house, we were now 8, including my mother's cat Mittens and my dog Bambi. My mother loved her cat, and I loved Bambi as myself. My dog was a good companion, intelligent, quiet, and obedient. We had brought her with us when we left Germantown to start a new life in southern New Jersey. My father used to go to the barber shop when he had some extra change to get a haircut. His barber sometimes let me sit in the big chair and trim my bangs. Somehow they were never even. One day he brought a basket of puppies into the barber shop. His miniature collie had mated with a German shepherd, accidentally. All the pups were long-haired, except for the runt of the litter. She had the coat of a shepherd, but the markings of a collie. She resembled a small deer, so sweet and vulnerable in the basket, so I called her Bambi. My father said we couldn't afford to have another dog. I said she could eat some of my food, but he was also worried about my mother, still grieving for her dog Sambo, a lively black cocker spaniel that was killed on the railroad tracks while we were gathering coal that fell from the passing railroad cars. See, what would happen, we had a coal stove. This was in Germantown, and coal was expensive, so if you went down to the train yard, the Pennsylvania Railroad, there was always a coal car, and you just waited until it went by, and the rattling, all the rattling, a lot of coal would fall down, and we'd just, fill up bags, and it would be enough for us. But Little Black Sambo, as she was called, ran in front of the train, and, anyway. Sambo never listened and ran in front of the train. My mother was devastated by the loss, and my father didn't think she would want another dog. but Bambi was so meek and loving that he relented. After a small flutter of protests and the fact that Mittens took a liking to her, she was given entrance to our family. I had never wanted to leave the city. Germantown was just a short trolley ride to Philadelphia, where there were lots of big libraries with an infinite amount of books. But nonetheless, we moved to a little starter house in Woodbury Gardens, with a pig farm and swamp to the right, and an unkempt field with an old barn across the road. It was a comfort having my dog in this unknown territory. We spent long hours together as I explored the small forest lining the edge of our neighborhood. I named all I saw: Red Clay Mountain, Rainbow Creek, Punk Swamp, and they still kept the names, I'm proud to say. Yeah, there's still Red Clay Mountain, and sorry, I just had to. There was life everywhere, mysterious and energetic. In time, I came to cherish our surroundings. We led our Peter Pan existence, Bambi, my spirit dog with the deep, sad eyes. Kimberly was often ill. The doctor ordered the house to be stripped of every allergen, including our precious animals. This was a terrible blow, yet I was not without understanding. I had no resentment against the baby or the doctor. We all knew it was our duty to help Kimberly, but the thought of giving up Mittens and Bambi was heartbreaking. I thought of running away with her, but where would we go? I could sleep in the fields shrouded at night with the invisible cloth of the wool gatherers. I could hide in the forest and build a hut in the trees and live like one of the lost boys. But I knew I could never run away and leave my siblings. I could never leave Kimberly. Who would rock her when my parents were working? Who would watch her sleep, making certain she did not hold her breath and leave us forever? The day was fast coming when the family offering to take Bambi would arrive. I vaguely knew one of them from school. The idea sickened me. In my heart, I felt a possessiveness I had never experienced. I couldn't bear the thought of someone else having my dog. I got up quite early and left the house with her. It was in my mind to take her to all the places we loved. We would take one last walk to Red Clay Mountain and stop a while by Rainbow Creek. I had a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper and some dog biscuits. I sat with Bambi at my feet and surveyed my domain. She would not eat her treats. She knows, I thought. She knows. I stopped trying to hide what was going to happen, and I told her everything, without words. I told her through my eyes from my heart. She licked my face, and I knew she understood. Bambi rarely barked. There was only the silence of her sad deer eyes. Soon it was time to go back home, but first I took her to Thomas's field, and we lay in the grass and looked up at the clouds. The sun was warm on my face, and I dozed. Bambi slept with her head and paw resting on my chest. I awoke and knew we had to hurry home. I could feel my mother searching me out. I ran across the fields toward home, just across the road. Bambi darted ahead of me, and I called her. She stopped suddenly in the middle of the road. I called her again, but she stayed still, looking right into my eyes. Even from a distance, it was as if I could see my own reflection. I froze. I just stood there as a fire truck came racing from nowhere and struck her. The fireman stopped and got out. My father rushed from the house and scooped her up, laying her near the bushes, the sacred bushes of God. No one said anything. No one asked what happened. The fireman felt terrible for killing her, but I knew it wasn't his fault. I knelt down and looked at my dog. She was still warm. There was not a mark on her, not even a drop of blood. It was as if she was sleeping, but she was dead. My mother was crying. My sister Linda's astonished blue eyes dominated her compassionate face. I got an old woolen blanket and wrapped her in it. My father buried her by the side of the house, and we said our prayers. I did not cry. The complexity of my feelings so profound that it lifted me above the realm of tears. I ruminated on this day for a long time. Did I wish her dead, or was it her? Surely she knew. Neither of us wanted her to belong to someone else. It was Indian summer, and the trees were already red and gold. As the days passed, I disobeyed my mother and bicycled across the forbidden parameter to Woodbury to find Harry Riddle. I thought he could solve the riddle that weighed on me so heavily, the riddle of Bambi's death. Harry was the one who had identified the spirits of the field, and I believe he knew the answer to everything. But for the first time, he was not at his station guarding his widow. He wasn't there the next time either, and I never saw him again. Sometime later, I was holding Kimberly in my arms. She had had an asthma attack while my parents were out. I tended to her as I was taught, and then was able to rock her to sleep. I heard some shouting from across the road. The sun was going down, and I stepped outside. The old black barn was in flames. I heard a terrible screeching. Someone said it was bats burning alive. I stood there cradling the baby. The sky was purple with golden streaks. I could see the planets and the evening star. Hovering above the field were swarms of gnats and fireflies. Pale lunar moths circled the night lights with a life of their own. My brother raced across the road. Nothing is more exciting for a young boy than a fire. Yet I knew the flames wouldn't spread. The barn would burn and leave its mark, but the field was safe, for the wool gatherers would protect it, just as Harry Riddle had protected his wife, and I was protecting Kimberly. The baby awoke and smiled at me. It occurred to me that nothing was more beautiful than a newborn smile. So I included the lyrics to this song from Horses because obviously this little story tells the root of where the song came from. So I'll just read the lyrics. Kimberly, the wall is high, the black barn, the babe in my arms in her swaddling clothes, and I know soon that the sky will split and the planets will shift, balls of jade will drop, and existence will stop. Little sister, the sky is fallen. I don't mind, I don't mind. Little sister, the fates are calling on you. Ah, here I stand again, in this old electric whirlwind. The sea rushes up my knees like flame, and I feel just like some misplaced Joan of Arc. And the cause is you, looking up at me. Ah, baby, I remember when you were born. It was dawn and the storm settled in my belly. And I rolled in the grass and I spit out the gas. And I lit a match and the void went flash and the sky split. And the planets hit. Balls of jade dropped and existence stopped. Little sister, the sky has fallen. I don't mind. I don't mind. Little sister, the fates are calling on you. Oh, I was young and crazy, so crazy I knew I could break through with you. So with one heart, with one hand I rocked you, with one heart I reached for you. And I knew your youth was for the taking, far on the mental plane. So I ran through the fields as the bats with their baby veined faces burst in flames in the violent violet sky. And I fell on my knees and pressed you against me, Your soul was like a network of spittle, like glass balls moving in like cold streams of logic. And I prayed as the lightning attacked that something would make it go crack. Something would make it go crack. Something would make it go crack. The palm trees fall into the sea. It doesn't matter much to me as long as you're safe, Kimberly, and I can gaze deep into your starry eyes. So, any questions? Anybody have a question? Yes?
It's kind of personal, but you really don't have to answer it much detail. But you dealt with much pain and loss throughout your life. Could you share some of your introspective thoughts on or enlightening experiences that have occurred as a result of loss?
Well, I can tell you a very short one. He's asking me if you didn't hear about loss, and wants a loss anecdote. So, to put it plainly, I think I've told this story before, but it's a good example. In 1994, in November, my husband died, and then a month later, my brother Todd died. And I was very, very close to my brother, and his death was quite sudden, and he had a stroke and just died. He was fine, and then he had a stroke and died. And he had a beautiful heart. And the last time, my brother loved to laugh, and my sister Linda and my brother Todd and I, there's a nice little picture of us all in the bathtub together. We were so very close, and the last time I saw him alive, which was only about a couple weeks before he died, we were celebrating Thanksgiving at my parents' house. My husband had just died, and of course I was extremely, it was a very rough time for me. And I was so devastated I could hardly get out of bed. And so my brother made me get in a car with him, and we drove to look at Hoedown Hall and the field where we used to play. That it was this book is the field, and this whole atmosphere was very sacred to my sister, brother, and I. And we sat there, and he stopped the car, and then he put on the soundtrack to Natural Born Killers. And because on Natural Born Killers, there's Flood did a remix of Rock and Roll Nigger. It's part of the soundtrack, and he put it as loud as possible, and revved up and like speeded down this road, and went past the Square Dance Hall and past the old skating rink, and put the windows down and was like, outside of society, he's singing along. And it was like such a unexpected thing to happen, because I had been doing nothing but crying and just at the depths. And it was such a great, just a moment of abandonment. And then we went and picked up my sister, and the three of us went to this place called Napoli Pizza. And it used to be the #1 pizza joint on the strip where we used to go, where we used to see Harry Real. But it had fallen down in time. So we went in there all excited. We were going to have a great piece of pizza. But the place would so hit the skids. We ordered 3 Cokes, but they only had enough ice for 1. The pizza wasn't very good, and they had a pinball machine, and it was unplugged, and Toddy plugged it in and almost got electrocuted because the grounds were all broke. Nothing worked. We asked for straws, but they only had one, and it was like dusty. And it just kept escalating everything. And for some reason, it just, because we were all grieving, you know, it just struck us funny. But like, because of like our history, you know how it is with your siblings or with a friend, your mother or your teacher or somebody says no laughing, and then you like can't stop laughing, so you get punished, and it doesn't matter, they could beat you with a cord, doesn't matter, you can't stop laughing. We were laughing so hard, I thought we were going to throw up. We were like, we left there in such pain. And then the next day I went back to Detroit. That was the last time I saw my brother alive. And so about a year later, after my brother died, I was back in New York, I don't know, a year and a half. I was walking down Houston Street, and I felt, sorry, I'm just accessing how I felt. I felt so desolate. I was just, it's all the only word I can tell you. And then I felt cold inside, shivering, and just desolate. And all of a sudden, I felt this warmth. It's like a tiny little thing. And then it just spread, warm through my body, down my arms, my hands. And I started feeling so happy. And then I started laughing. And as I was laughing, it just involuntarily, I said, Toddy, it was my brother. I could feel completely, I just know it was my brother. My brother came in and, you know, filled that empty, desolate place. And I just started laughing. And then, you know, zippity-doo-dah. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my answer. So, any more questions? Yes. Yep.
I saw you in Chicago at the Congress Theater with Ralph Nader. Are you planning any other concerts?
I don't know. Anything could happen, but it's Ralph's birthday today. So, Ralph, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ralph. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Ralph. So, okay, I'm going to switch over for a few minutes to this other little book. And
What happened to Mittens? Where did Mittens go?
Mittens went to a friend of my mother's, and my mother was brokenhearted, and but Mittens was a very old cat. Bambi was Bambi was about 4, but Mittens was like 12 or 13 years old, and poor Mittens. Anyway, she was happy. I mean, Mittens was okay. It was all right. But thank you for asking. The thing about I mean, I guess everybody's like this, but the animals that we had, because we had different animals, that some were killed, some had to go to a farm, or various things happened. We didn't have enough money, we couldn't feed them, or they had to, they all became family legend, you know, and they were all talked about, you know, constantly, just like another family member. And so, you know, they all had important places. And I never forgot Bambi. I never had another dog since. But anyway. So this little book, The Coral Sea, when Robert, well, I'll just read the little introduction to this one too. It'll tell why I wrote this. And this is also a reprint, to put loosely. I mean, it's another, it was published some years ago, but I decided, you know, to do it again, and there's some extra poems and things in it. Nice little book. So. Several hours before Robert died, I asked him how I might best serve him in his absence. We both knew he was dying, and despite all mortal agony, the conversation flowed as it might at any time in our lives. We spoke of work, the source of our common devotion, which only strengthened with his departure. Robert asked me to write a preface for Flowers, his forthcoming book. "Take care of my flowers," he said. "I will do it," I told him. He asked me if I would write our story. He knew it was etched in my memory, for he had often asked me to tell it to him before we went to sleep. It was a terrible vow to have to make. After his death, I wrote a final flower for the Bullfinch edition of his color photographs of flowers. I also wrote the poem Reflecting Robert for his memorial booklet entitled Mirrors, but it took me a long time to find it within me to write our story. Instead, I wrote The Coral Sea, A Season in Grief, all that I knew of him encrypted within a small suite of prose poems. They speak of his love for art, his patron Sam Wagstaff, and his caring for me. But most important, his resolute will to live that could not be contained, even in death. Oh, that's okay. So, so I think what I'm going to do is read the little poems in the front, and because the little prose poems are quite complex, so they're best read on your own. But I'll read the poems. I don't know if I've ever read these poems out loud, so I hope I don't stumble over them, but anyway, I'll try. The first one is called The Boy Who Loved Michelangelo, which he did. It was said that he had the face of a god, yet some saw a demon with rope shoes and a twist of vine encircling locks. Veins ran his marble arms that sang, scoring mountains as a mist permeating a crack in the heart and the golden sling. He fashioned in ways we dare not dream, with razor scraping the rump of need, exposing muscle of a love not gleaned. We are the buffalo, a dying breed, hauled in cart's magnificent bone, shame and ecstasy no one can own, slaves embrace as wisdom groans, volumes of nothing written in stone. This little poem is, thank you. Thank you for desiring to, but not knowing whether you should. It's always a big problem with poetry. It's like, should I clap? Am I supposed to clap? Am I going to look like an asshole? Is she going to think? And I'm thinking, do they like it? Do they not like it? No. Just joking. No. Well, I have to say I'm very proud of that poem because it has, I don't really know how to write a sonnet except it has 14 lines, so I had to really wrestle because it actually had 16 lines, so I had to wrestle to sculpt it into 14 so it could be sort of a fake sonnet. So, a fake sonnet, that's like, it's a very hard thing. It's, you know, they have school, you know, people talk about how difficult it is to write a sonnet, but you just try to write a fake one. They're really hard. This I wrote, it's called Reflecting Robert, and I wrote this shortly after he died for his memorial booklet. Blessedness is within us all. It lies upon the long scaffold, patrols the vaporous hall. In our pursuits, though still, we venture forth, hoping to grasp a handful of cloud and return, unscathed, cloud in hand. We encounter space, fist, violin, or this, an immaculate face of a boy, somewhat wild, smiling in sun. He raises his hand as if in carefree salute, shading eyes that contain the threat of God. Soon they will gather power, disenchantment. They will reflect enlightenment, agony. They will reveal the process of love. They will, in an hour alone, shed tears. His mouth a circlet, a baptismal font, opening wide as the lips of a damsel, sounding the dizzying extremes, the relativity of vein, the hip of unrest. For the sake of wing there is shoulder, for symmetry there is blade. He kneels, humiliates, he pierces her side, offering spleen to the wolves of the forest. He races across the tiles, the human board, virility, coquetry, all a game well played. Immersed in luminous disgrace, he lifts as a slave, a nymph, a fabulous hood. As a rose, a thief of life, he will parade, nude, crowned with leaves, immortal. He will sing of the body, his truth. He will increase the shining neck, pluck airs toward our delight of the waning, the blossoming, the violent charade. But who will sing of him? Who will sing of his blessedness, the blameless eye, the radiant grin? For he, his own messenger, is gone. He has leapt through the Orphic glass to wander eternally in search of perfection, his blue ankles tattooed with stars. What time is it? Oh. You're so naughty. Say, okay, I'm going to read a couple more things, and then we'll, sign the 9 million books. I want to read one of the cafe tales. There's actually 2 of them, and they're both rooted around McDougal Street. This one was not in the original. Some of the pieces written in here were written specifically for this volume. But this one was supposed to be in the original volume, and I wrote it in around 1990 or 1989, 1990. But it was too long to go in the original one, so I'll read it. I wrote it in Michigan, and I wanted to mention that because the beans that I mention in the first sentence, I don't think you can buy here, but you can buy them in Michigan in case you're interested. It's called Two Worlds. I fired up a pan of Joan of Arc beans, poured olive oil over some shredded lettuce, and opened a bottle of Gatorade. I was hungry, so I stood as I ate, then scraped my plate and left it in the sink. Sated, I shifted gears, rummaging around until I found what I was looking for, a film cassette of Cocteau's Orphée, which I shoved in the player, fast-forwarding to the part about the death of Segeste, Orphée's intoxicated and scornful young rival. Pausing on an image of the Café des Poètes. I'm a terrible pronouncer, but, what can I do? I'm just like, what is it? Unilingual. And I can only speak American, tinged with South Jersey, so I'm not even going to try to say Café des Poètes or something, because it would be unauthentic, to say the least. Anyway, you know this movie, this Orphée movie, this Cocteau movie. If you don't, you should really get it and look at it. It's really cool. So I was sort of obsessed with this movie for a while, and I have to say, I love being in St. Clair Shores with my husband and children, but culturally it was, 7-Eleven and a few other things. So when they opened up this place called King Video, and when I left New York, they didn't have videos yet, and then videos came out a little later in St. Clair Shores than the rest of the world, but I was in heaven because I could actually get foreign movies, and so I would get one. And Fred and I would go to King's Video. Sorry to digress, but I feel compelled to tell this story. Fred, of course, was my late husband, and anyway, Fred and I would go to King Videos, and each of us were allowed to pick 2 movies, and they didn't have a whole bunch, but Fred's favorite was Das Boot, which is some really depressing movie about, a submarine that goes through 3 hours of hell just to be exploded in the end or something. And so he would always get Das Boot and Spinal Tap, and my favorite was to get Orphée and French Lieutenant's Woman. So, because I was more pretentious than him. So, but in any event, sorry, I'll get back on track. Pausing on an image of the Café des Poets, I shrugged off the present and freely entered as the action heated up against a soundtrack of motorcycles and bongos. I leaned against the wall facing the exit, zeroing in on Juliet Greco's bangs and beat sweater as Orphée sang bitterly from another universe. I was satisfied to note that I was dressed exactly like the drunken poet, a shirt opened at the neck, though his was soon to be spattered with blood, rolled trousers, leather shoes, no socks. Moving past the bar, I paused to look at my reflection. My collar was stained from the deep red juice of the kidney beans, a perfect match. I downed a coffee, then stepped into the light, attempting to extract myself cell by cell from the increasingly unstable scene. I had no desire to witness yet again the indifferent snuffing of modern poetry. I figured to stop at the 2 worlds, but as I approached the unremarkable facade, I hesitated. There were too many people, students mostly. They poured out into the street, waving the flags of the future. I felt I knew them, but I also felt they would not know me, a mere intruder spirited through a dusty glass from a realm where a transistor dictates the sublime. Just a second. It's making me want coffee. I slipped my hand in my pocket and found a wad of notes, pounds, marks, and Swiss francs. I could feel the restless, belligerent aspects of my personality surfacing. I stepped into a tobacconist and picked up a Bic, a journal, and a have-a-hank. It seemed I had a small wound in my neck, and my shirt was becoming quite wet. I tried to wipe the stain from my collar, but it spread instead. A kid was hawking papers, snow in the desert. I entered the cafe unnoticed. My unaccountable wound was my ticket in. I opened the journal intended to write, but I drew instead. The atmosphere was intolerable. Oh, the atmosphere was tolerable. Both are good. And I soon became engrossed in my work, blotting out the whispers and laughter that tended to make me uneasy. I sketched out a shield, divided it into 3 horizontal panels, marking the top with the letter A and an O at the bottom. The center panel was a pre-existing landscape where phrases laced the high grass. I had in my mind that if I peered long enough, I'd make them out, coming up with the words that would set this place on its ear. Kneeling, I collected what I could as the blade sliced through my threadbare trousers, issuing small streams that trickled from the edge of the table onto the speckled linoleum. Surrounded by onlookers, I divvied out pastel-colored notes from an overflowing egg basket, the spoils of a disturbed bunny. It's good, right? Actually, when I found this manuscript, because it was lost for about 15 years, and I found it and I read it again, I couldn't even believe that I came up with that. Suddenly I was tired. The jukebox was a mix of elevator jazz and 60s garage rock. Riot on Sunset Strip was projected on the back wall, and a dosed mimsy farmer, writhing in a flowered mini dress, was about to be nailed by several hopped-up hipsters. The seeds permeated the air. Did you ever see that movie, Riot on Sunset Strip? It's one of the great classics of my generation. The artist? Screw it, go see Riot on Sunset Strip, I'm telling you. Sorry. If you could see Mimsy Farmer like in a sort of a cardigan sweater and a mini skirt, it's like, that's all the woman you need. I don't know, is this an intellectual audience or what? Sorry, I'm just, this part about, this just gets me. You know, because somebody had to write about it. Somebody had to write about Mimsy Farmer and Riot on Sunset Strip, or it would never be taken seriously. The seeds permeated the air. I picked up my stuff and left, leaving several pounds on the table. The waiter rushed after me. "What's this?" he said, waving the notes. "Oh, sorry," I said, extending my wad. He peeled off a few bills and he shook his head. It occurred to me that I wasn't sure where the hell I was. Everything was familiar, foreign. I stopped at the Cafe Isabel looking for a phone book. There were several stacked in a corner. There were pictures of the young adventurer in her sailor garb and Arab dress. They were tacked on the wall behind an impressive coffee urn. A kid was hawking papers, flash flood in the desert. Oblivious to onlookers, I removed her image, but it turned to dust in my hand. I ordered a Turkish coffee, but I did not drink it, as I suddenly wanted something stronger. Nothing, yet everything clicked. I circled back to the two worlds, though the interior had changed. Even the cigarette smoke seemed different. It was a lot like the Café des Poets, table revolutionaries and pallbearers. I ordered a Pernod and water. I no longer cared about anything. Sitting in the bar was a Modigliani with chestnut hair piled high in a top knot that enhanced her long, pale neck. She mouthed the words, "so long," and I realized that I hadn't talked to anybody save waiters and shopkeepers for several days. I looked at my watch. It hadn't been wound. A pity, for I had neither the time nor sense of time. A late lunch of fruit and milk. I had scribbled that on the inside of my wrist, but the thought was repellent. I ordered another Pernod and water, but what I really wanted was to lie down. I had lost a lot of blood, and some had dripped on the page of my journal. The tears of Pollock, I explained to the waiter. The tears of Pollock. I scrawled across the page. The drips multiplied, forming a fence of slim, jagged poles. The lines I had written multiplied as well. I could not tame them, and my entire station was noticeably vibrating as if teeming with newborn caterpillars. Quickly, I drained my glass and motioned for another. I tried to focus on a portrait behind the brass cash register. Flemish, 15th century. I had seen it somewhere before, perhaps in the hall of a local guild. The sight of it produced a shudder and then a curious rush of warmth. It was her head covering, a fragile habit framing her face like the folding wings of a large diaphanous moth. I laid my possessions on the table, foreign coins, my wad, rabbit's foot, a bic, and a gem concealed in a yellow packet. I opened it with some difficulty. There it was, a minute primary vow. I read. I rose to leave. The poets were sizing me up. A shield the thickness of a journal lay at my feet. With some degree of self-mockery, I offered it up. It struck me as I made my way to the door that I had enacted this before. Mirrored action with a shift of contents, a palette shape, a sealed brush, bits of chalk. I considered becoming a painter, but I didn't have the stuff. I stumbled out as several students pulled on the coattails of the ragged coat I had found at a makeshift stall in Camden Town that sold used boots and greatcoats and relics of war. They disbanded after rifling my paltry loot, murmuring like indiscernible bees. Murmuring like indiscernible bees. Worn phrases stung at me, simultaneous with a looping double mint jingle. I leaned against the brick for several minutes, overcome with the sudden appearance of the sun and an overwhelming desire for a stick of gum. I noticed the Cafe Dante was straight ahead. A kid hawking papers. One doesn't become, one is. I knew where I was. Just beyond were the green double doors of the gun club. I plucked the strings of my gone shoes smack into love. If I walked straight, I'd hit the wide boulevard. So I turned the corner that led into a narrow passageway. It was opportune, for abruptly everything came up. Beans bobbing in a green fluorescent liquid, as if a plunger had released all the poisons of a plugged-up sink. I steadied myself, unearthing a stale stick of blackjack from the depths of a pocket. I felt whole again. Taking deep breaths, I crossed the street of cafes to the street of monochrome dreams and paused before an open window. A woman bent over linen, strands of hair escaping from her pins, a wave loosening parallel to her arm as she pressed a heavy iron. I had the sudden urge to unburden all, to be nothing. I wanted to cry out, but I couldn't. My breath formed language, but no sound, while the clear sky crisscrossed with fading remnants of prayers and poems, trailing as though from the prop plane of Apollinaire. I dreamed of being a painter, but I let the image slide into a vat of pigment and pastry foam while I bounded from temple to junkyard in pursuit of the word. A solitary shepherd, solitary shepherdess, gathering bits of wool plucked by the hand of the wind from the belly of a lamb. A noun, a none, a red, o blue, twittering threads caught in the thorns of an icy branch. Running in place, a ghost in vague expanse, I opened my arms to the sovereign trees and submitted to their pure, unholy embrace. Well, thank you. I'm going to read one more little thing, and thank you all for coming. And anybody have a question? Yes, you.
What do you think of Occupy?
What do I think of it? I think occupy. Yes. You. Yeah.
Working on your detective novel?
Yes. You. Yes. You.
Do you have a favorite coffee brand?
A favorite coffee? I like You know what I like? I like that kind, you get it in New Orleans, Cafe du Monde, I like that. But, yeah, with chicory. But, if I'm really desperate, I just like Nescafe Classic. I'll make a cup of that. But I like Cafe du Monde coffee. But I just like coffee, period, Yes. Yes. Well, I have a friend, John Logan, who is a scriptwriter, and he's written a lot of wonderful scripts, and he and I are intermittently working on a script for it, and when we think it's right, we'll make one. Yeah. Yes, you, green, eat. Is that what say cat? You.
I'm a prop student, and I'm wondering what's your number one advice for young artists?
Did you say you live on what?
I'm a prop student.
Oh, I thought you said. No, I thought she said she was a pot something, Work hard, Really. Work hard, take care of yourself, take care of your teeth. Seriously, take care of yourself, drink a lot of water, and you have to work hard. I mean, there's nothing more important to any artist than to work hard, I remember once I did about 7 or 8 really cool drawings, I thought, and I showed them to a teacher, and he said, yeah. And I said, well, I did these 7 drawings. And he said, Picasso did 7 drawings before he had a cup of coffee every day. It's like, get to work, so I don't know. But working and developing discipline and a love of the process without thinking whether, you're going to win a prize for it or people are going to love it or you're going to get a show. Just work first for the pleasure of working and for the honor of being touched by the muse or God or whatever, that you can actually do this work. Because we are, if you truthfully want me to say any more, we are in a time, more than any other time I've seen in my lifetime, where the cult of fame and celebrity is so high that people forget what they're working for. You're working to do something great, something that will, send this town on its ear, something that will change the world, something that will inspire or incite. And if you get accolades or get anything else, that's great, but that's not what you're working for. And if you live in obscurity for quite a while, but you believe in what you're doing and you feel joy because you're doing it and therefore are special, you'll be fine. So anyway, that's my thought. So I'm just going to read this one last little thing and then I'll try to assign. I'm just going to do it quickly, so unless it's really like it's your grandmother and it's her birthday, just let me sign it. But if you have something that's really, really important, but it has to be really important, otherwise I'll shoot you. Okay, this is called Art in Heaven. Navigating the feathered terrain, dropping phrases like, I've been in worse places, I've been in better, I've been around. And all you want is a helping hand to be lifted out of the mire, out of beauty, to be lifted. I let fly the windows overlooking the river where the children drew water and the women pounded their husbands' shirts with a stone. Children half naked, biting into strange fruit, deliriously sweet, sing, one day we shall all be dead, but those who keep moving, tracing and retracing their steps, they shall never die. They shall be called Rembrandt, Columbus. I dreamed of being a missionary. I dreamed of being a mercenary. My knapsack was a width of linen tied like a pump on a stick. Looking up, clouds form and reform. They resemble an embryo, a departed friend resting horizontal, or a great arm, compassionate as a spring, that if so ordained, might reach and take up that linen sack, and all gathered within, if only but the soul of an idea, the color of water, the weight of a hill. So, thank you. Thank you, everybody.